In the last video, we talked about route parameters with React Router. In this video, which will definitely be a longer video, we're going to work through a little bit more lifelike example of what you would actually use these for. I've got the application from last time running. There's the code, and it was basically this. You can go from one page to another, pass like an ID, and then use that ID for something. Now let's build something. So I'm just going to start this other app from scratch. And so I'm in this folder. This is where I'm creating all these projects for this series. I'm going to create a new one, and I'm going to say this is going to be actually 15. This is the Params server. And so I am going to create an Express, a little bitty Express app, and get this running locally and start getting some data coming out of the API there, and then call that from our React app. So how do we start these things? Let's make sure I'm where I want to be. I am. I'm going to do an npm install, npm init. That's how we start our projects. And I'm not going to fill out any of that stuff right now. So open this up in Atom. All right. This should just about do it right there. So here's our package JSON we just created. Let's do some installs. So let's npm install express. And we'll get started with that. We'll see if we need to install anything else. Okay. We need a file for configuring our server. So if you haven't done any Express before, this will obviously be very new to you. If you have, then we'll breeze through this fairly quickly. I've got some other screencasts that do talk about setting up Express. And of course, there's plenty of information out on the web. So let's just do this. So here we are bringing in the Express package, which I just installed. This is the app instance, and this is the thing that we will configure. And like, for example, we will configure it to listen on a port, and pick any reasonable port number, I guess. That's fairly reasonable. Okay, let's create a default route. With routes in Express, you get two parameters, request and response. And the request is, of course, information about the request coming in. Response is how we might respond back. So in this case, let's just do res.send. And let's send back, let's actually JSON. Let's send back an object. And we'll use this object to actually describe the endpoints in our application. I'm going to say there's going to be a search one. And so it's going to be at just search. And then there's going to be one for detail. And that is going to be one that will take an ID. So let's just see if this runs as is. So npm start 7538. Let's open this up here. Localhost 7538. So there we go. We got something. So our server is now running. If it wasn't running, none of that would be working. This is not going to be the APIs we're going to call. So let's go make those right now. So I already said one of them is going to be at /search. So there's that. Or, yeah, I'm going to change that. It's just going to be list. That's better. That more expresses what I want to do here. And so with this list API, I want to return a list of things, and the thing I'm going to make a list of is inventory items. And so I just need to create some sort of data store. Since we're not going to set up Mongo or Postgres or anything like that, I'll just create a variable and I'll just call it data. And this will work. So I can do something like res.send the data. I'm going to wrap it in an object. There you go. And let's actually go see if that works. So I don't have to keep restarting this server. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say nodemon server.js. So now every time I save that server file, it'll actually restart my server for me. So now I change this to list, and so now if I go to /list, I will get that object with a data property with an empty array because I haven't put anything in it yet. So let's put something in it. So each item is going to have a few properties. Each one's going to have an ID, and so let's just give it some number. Let's give it a name. In my inventory, I'm going to put very important things to me, like Dr. Pepper. And quantity, I have 792 bottles, 2 liter. Description, basically the best drink ever. Way better than Mr. Pibb. All right, save that. Let's go back and look, see if that comes back. Hey, look, we're getting that back. Let's add a few other things, and we'll just go ahead and start getting this hooked up to our little application. So ID 42, name steak, specifically ribeye. It's so tasty. Quantity, I want lots of ribeye on site, so 400 pounds. We'll make this string 400 pounds. And then description. Tasty, tasty steak. And then let's see, finally, if I need to have something else, I guess I will have Hostess cupcakes. And I have 56 of those. Tasty treats for when I want dessert. Okay, this will work with as a basic data set for our application. Refresh, that's all of our data. Now let's go back to this application, and instead of just listing out numbers here, let's make an API call to this API that we've made here and list that out instead. So the URL I want is this. And so if you're new to development, you can totally just get a server running on your computer, and you can call from your React app to whatever server or app you have running. And so I have this running localhost at this port, which means when I have my React project, which is also running on localhost but at a different port, I can just call that other thing on the computer. And so let's go with our index component. Now, what I want to do is I am actually going to start breaking these out into separate components because they are going to get a little bit more complicated than this gadget right here. So I'm going to open this up and I'm going to create a new file for index component. Now I have in my clipboard that URL, so I'm going to paste that right there for a bit. We'll come back to it. Take this component out to here. I'm going to turn this into a class component. Okay, so if you ever do need to turn a functional component into a class-based component, think of the functional component as essentially just a render function. And so I can go here and then I can turn this into that render function and then just paste that in right there. And that's going to give you a fairly fast conversion from a functional component to a class-based component. Let's get some tabbiness going on right there. Okay. So I need to import React from React. All right, it's exported, but it is not imported here. So I need to import index component from. And let's see how we're looking over here. Okay, link is not defined. Well, link is not defined because I moved my index component rendering to another component and I don't have link imported in. Whenever you're refactoring and you're moving things around, this is a common problem. It's not a big problem, but it is something that happens. And when you refactor, sometimes you're going to move yourself away from variables or things you had access to. In this case, I had access to link in the other file because here it is, I've imported it. I don't have it here, so I just need to get that. Okay, cool. There they are. There's the same stuff. It's now all working as it was. That's just extracted into another component. And I'm not going to do that with detail yet. I'll do that when I get there. I want to go ahead and set this thing up, get an AJAX call going, and start showing some real data. And then I'll go back and refactor the other one. So what I need to do is make an API call. And I'm just going to go ahead and store that here in my state for this component. So I can say constructor super and say this.state equals an object, and I'm going to put an inventory, and that's going to be an array. So I'm going to grab the array that's coming back here, this data thing. I'm going to grab that, and I'm going to put it in here in state. And so what that means is I'm ultimately going to need to map. So this dot state dot inventory dot map and for here I'm going to return a map. What it does is it iterates over an array and is for the purpose of transforming, not changing the original, but basically taking the original and creating a new transformed version. In this case, I'm taking an array of data and ultimately creating an array of React things, and so, or React components. And so I am going to return from here exactly what I have here. Actually, I can just copy this in because that's what I'm going to return, except of course I'm not going to have this data hard-coded. It needs to come from the item itself, which means I don't need these anymore. All right, so first of all, whenever you're mapping in React, you might recall that you have to specify a key. In this case, I have an ID on all the things coming from the API, like so. I can just use that ID as my key. It just has to be unique. And usually when you're calling APIs and getting data back with IDs, those are meant to be unique, so it should be totally fine. And then what I want to do is I want to link to that item. And so I'm going to, first of all, put the item name here. And here I want to put the item ID. And so I am going to create that link right here. I'm going to use this whole template strings in ES6. And so I need detail slash and then dollar curly braces and then say item.id. And then in here, use that variable. So that in theory will work once we have data. Right now, I have no data, so this is blank. So let's take this URL that I've had sitting up there for a while now and use it. A commonly recommended place for doing AJAX calls if you're loading when a component, if you're loading data when a component is being loaded. Common place for that would be component did mount. So this would be after React has put the component, essentially, logically speaking, on the page. So it's component did mount, and here I can do my fetch. So I'm going to say fetch to that location. And then when I get that back, I'm going to return the response as JSON. And then here, I will actually have the results of the API call, or at least should, if everything's in good shape. So let's check that out. All right. So fetch API cannot load localhost 7538 list. No access control allow origin header is present on the requested resource. Origin localhost 3000 is therefore not allowed access. Well, this makes me very sad. This means I have to go set up course headers. So, you know what, let's do it. Because we have to. So I'm going to Google for Express course headers. Let's see. Every time I have to do this, there's a Stack Overflow post that I go to, and I think actually this is it. There's some libraries for doing this. Oh, here we go. Right there. I think this example will work. And so I'm going to take this and let's go over to our Express site and put this in. Okay, so let's explain what this is. So this is making a piece of middleware, what is called middleware in Express. And that is essentially a function that is stuck into the pipeline of the request. And whenever you want to just create course headers and just open everything up, this is essentially what you can do. You can be more restrictive than I'm about to be. But right now I'm going to take this and I'm going to modify this slightly. I'm going to say any origin, in other words, no matter where you're coming from, you can make a request here. And so I think this will work as is, but I have to hook it up. So this is how you hook up a piece of middleware. Middleware is distinguished from these simply because we have this next and we call it as a part of the process. And so basically what's going to happen is a request comes in because this here happens or comes before any of these other things in the file. This bit of code is going to get hit before it gets here. And when it goes through this piece of code, it's going to add these headers to the response. So that actually might do it. Let's go see. Whoa, yes, sweet. That totally worked. Okay, while we're here and looking at warnings, I have this warning, and this comes from my changes earlier. I moved all my uses of the link component to another file from app.js. And so I'm getting a warning saying you defined link on line 3, but you don't use it. And that's absolutely right. And so therefore, I'm going to get rid of that. Okay, so here we are with our data. Now what we can do is we can change our state. So here in our index component, we have the data. Let's call a set state like so. We're going to set the inventory to results.data, and specifically .data, not because that's some special name. That's just because whenever I am sending things back, I'm sending them back in a property called data. That's it. So now, hey, there they are. Okay, so Dr. Pepper, steak, ribeye specifically, and Hostess cupcakes. Now, if we look at the over here on the left in the middle, you can see that this is going to ID 98, ID 42, and ID 786, which is in fact the IDs I gave the data right here. So we actually have this page complete. We're done with this one. So now let's go to the detail. So the detail, we're getting ID 42. Now we need to do something with it. What's often going to be the case with APIs is that you're going to have, let's say, a search API that returns a minimal piece of the data, and then like a detail API that will return like a full data set for something. This would be actually really common because you don't want to return a whole bunch of data on an API that's meant for searching. At least you often don't want to. You'll just return a minimal amount, and then they can go back and fetch other things and other data if they want more details. In this case, I'm always returning all of this information. And so if I want to, we could just pretend that this is going to be not returning all the data, or we can just actually trim it down. I'll trim it down so that way it's a little bit more like the real world. And so if we pretend that this data is our database, what we're going to do is we're going to quote unquote select from our database only a subset of the data. And there's already in JavaScript a way of like looping over an array and creating a transformed version of it, and we've already talked about it. It's called map. So what I want to do is, instead of returning all the data, I am going to return only a subset. The user interface I need only returns two things, or needs two things, excuse me. It needs the ID and it needs the name. So this actually, I think, is all we need for that. So let's go check it. If we go look here, do we get a subset? And the answer is no, we don't get a subset because things are apparently exploding. And so what's going on here? Well, unexpected token. You know what? Here's essentially my mistake. I have a single line arrow function. And what I need to do is I want to return this, and normally you can do that, but I think because this is an object literal, it's getting confused with those curly brackets and thinking I'm trying to do a real body. So I'm just going to do this and say, let's turn this into a full, not a one single line function, and say return that. And let's see, node mod should be going still. Okay, so that fixed it. Sweet. Let's go back and list this, and now we are getting the subset. So this is a little bit more real world. Very common. You do a search or get a list, you get a little bit, and then you go back and you go get detail to get more information. Let's go back and make sure this is still working. It does seem to be working fine, so we haven't broken anything. So now let's go back to our API, because that means, if we just trim down all the data, that means we need to create an endpoint here in our API that allows us to get all of those details. So let's do that. And we've actually already said a long time ago we were going to do this. Remember up here when we were doing detail and AD? That's exactly what we're going to do right here. So we're going to create a new endpoint. Like so. And okay, so I need to get the ID. Here's the logical process. If somebody's coming in and wanting details on a specific item, I need to take the ID of the item that they want, find the item, and then return it. And so if I want to find a single item in an array, like filter would be one way of doing it, but really the best way to do it is to use the find function. So let's do that. Let's say data.find, and with find you pass in a function. So I'm going to pass in an arrow function, and what you do is you return a Boolean, true or false, on whether or not this is the right item. And so imagine that this is running a for loop, looping over all of your items, and then giving you the item. That's what's here. And so then you return and say, okay, I want to say that this is the correct item if item.id is equal to, we'll do double equal for now, because this param is actually going to come in as a string. I'm going to say that this is the right item if my request.params.id is equal to that item ID. And then I'm going to res.send, res.json, the item. Let's try this out. And so I've got an item with the ID of 786. That is Dr. Pepper. Let's see if this works. Okay, well, I apparently have another error. So, you know what? I just can't seem to do my arrow functions right tonight. You know what? Just can't seem to do it. So if you are doing a single line arrow function, you don't put the return keyword in. All right, here we go. All right, 768 is Dr. Pepper, quantity 792, bottles, description. All right, it's just Dr. Pepper. So list then. If we go back and get number 42, so detail 42. Then we're going to get steak. All right. So of course, if you ask for something that isn't there, then you're not going to get much of anything. This would actually be a great time to do a 404. And so let's do that, I guess. So if we go to the API, we can do this. We can say if item is undefined. So if it didn't find an item, let's do, I think it's send status. If this doesn't work, I will totally Google that here in a second. And res.json. All right, no errors from NodeMon. Not found. Boom. It's exactly what we want. We're getting a 404 not found for that one, but what happens if we do 42? We get the item. Okay, we've set up everything here. We're golden. So, yeah, we're done with that. No messages we need to see here from the server, so I think we're probably just completely done with the server. And we can just focus and finish up the React app. Okay, so we have our detail component. It needs to make that AJAX call to go get that data. So let's do what we did with the index component. We'll create a new file called detail component. And I'm going to import detail component from there. I'll go ahead and get that set up now. Since that doesn't actually exist, bad things will happen here because they expected a string, not an object, bad things. All right, so let's go to detail component and say, okay. Same process as before. I'm going to need to import React from React and export default class detail component. Extends there we go. And now this essentially, all this stuff becomes my render. Like so. Okay, let's see if things are working. And the answer is no, they are not working. So let's debug this. line 8 in detail component, props is not defined. Line 8 detail component, props is not defined. And it's totally right. The reason why it's right is because I made a mistake in my refactoring. When you do the pure functional components, the props get passed in as an argument to the function. But when you're in a class component, the props are on the instance. And so we can say this.props. And now we're back to where we want to be. And so Dr. Pepper, 786, there it is. Steak and Hostess cupcakes. So let's actually go get some more data. So we're here on this page. We need to make the API call to get all the details. So same thing as last time. We're going to create a constructor. And I'm going to go ahead and create some default state. And this.state equals like so. And a few things. I know I'm going to need the name and the description and the ID. And let's see, name, description, ID. What else was in that detail? Quantity. Okay. Quantity was also a string. So that's my default state. This is going to be the name. And so let's just say this.state.name. And just so we have it on the page, you wouldn't normally do this for a user. This.props.match.params.id. You don't normally put the ID for them out there to see it. Maybe on the URL, but it's not useful display information for normal people. So let's say quantity. I want to say this.state.quantity. And description. So that's it there. Let's go Dr. Pepper. Okay, so we have the ID because that comes from the route parameter specifically. So we have that. We don't have any of the other data. We're going to have to go get it. For the name, I'm actually just going to put loading in here for now. And so that way we can see that it's loading. And then whenever the data gets there, we'll replace the name with something useful. Actually, and I'm using ID from the params, not even from here, so I just realized I don't even need that. Okay, let's make that API call. So component did mount. I want to make that API call once the component is ready. So I will do that here. I will say fetch, and I need to put that fetch URL in there. So let's see, what's that going to be? Well, this is what the detail URL is, so I will take that right there. Let's turn this into a string literal so that I can switch out this 42, because it's not going to be 42 for every single item. That's just one of them. So this now becomes something that comes from our route. So this.props.match.params.id. A little wordy. And so I'm going to fetch, and then I'm going to, of course, get the response back from the server. And then I'm going to return response.json to turn that into JSON. And then I'm going to get the results. And when I have the results, I'm going to get the values I need. Like, for example, this set state. I need the name, because I don't have the name. So that'll come from results.name. Because this should be essentially this object right here. So name, I need quantity, and I need description. So description, results. I'm going to name that result because it is a singular item. I like that. Doesn't matter though, it's just a variable name. And then quantity. And so this will cause a re-render after you set state. This will cause a re-render, and so in theory, all that data will be there if I did everything correctly. And I did. Excellent. So let's go back to our index page. And so if I go to Hostess Cupcakes, we're going here to there's 98. We get the quantity and we get the description. Though, of course, steak has a different quantity and description, and Dr. Pepper has a different quantity and description, and all that. And so this actually works. Now, I want to open up the network tab and review exactly what's going on. So I am going to do preserve log because I want to see the network calls when I go from here. Actually, I'm not even changing pages because this is a React app, so I don't even need to do that. Because when you refresh pages, all this data goes away in the network tab. And I was just thinking that, wait a minute, this is a regular website, and so when I switch pages, I'll lose the data. But that's not the case. This is a React app. We're switching and not losing that data, so we're good. So here we are. I'm going to refresh, and this gets us our initial call. This is for getting the page. This bundle.js is the React bundle that Webpack creates for us. That's our application. And let's see, did we make any API calls? I think we did, but I don't see them. Localhost, that's for this bundle. Oh, well, duh, there it is. List, this is the API call because it's going to 7538. And 7538 is our API. Okay, so I'm not going crazy. That API call is there. And if we look, we can see the data that comes back from the API call. So that's excellent. So if I close that, whenever I go to the next page, I'm going to expect another API call. So I'm going to go to steak. And if I scroll down a little bit, I will see 42. Well, 42 is not the full URL. If we go to the headers, we can see that's to detail 42, and it's just showing you the very last piece of the path. And so when I went there, it made an API call to here to get the data. So if I go back, it actually made another API call to get fresh list of data. Now I'm going to go to Hostess Cupcakes and went and got the details for Hostess Cupcakes right there. And so that's the basic idea. And so it's taken us a while, but we've gotten here. We now have an app that's built on top of React for the front end that is using React Router to use the routing here to specify not only routes but also route values, so that when we switch pages we can get that route value and then make other API calls to get other data. That's the usefulness of route parameters. Super common, absolutely common in application development. You'll see them all over the place. If you're new to programming, you will just look around at a lot of the common websites you use. If you go to Amazon, you'll see them whenever you go from like a search page to a detail page, for example. Very, very common, and now you know how to do it, both on the React side, and if you've never seen Express, a very whirlwind introduction to how you would create a really simple, basic, very, very basic API in Express to do that same thing.